Single dad saved twin alien girls left by stepmom, unaware they'd become his everyday miracle. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. Nathan Brooks never imagined his life would become a chaotic blend of diapers, formula, and intergalactic paperwork. But when his ex-wife abandoned 2 alien infants on his doorstep with nothing but a hastily scribbled note, he discovered that fatherhood knew no boundaries, not even across the stars. Nathan had always considered himself an ordinary man living an ordinary life. At 32 years old, he worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, lived in a cramped apartment in downtown Seattle, and spent his evenings reading science fiction novels that transported him to worlds far more exciting than his own. His marriage to Sarah had been the one adventure he thought would last forever, but like so many things in life, it had crumbled under the weight of unfulfilled expectations and growing resentment. The divorce papers had been signed 3 months ago, and since then, Nathan had been drifting through his days in a fog of loneliness and regret. He was not wealthy, not particularly handsome, and certainly not someone who stood out in a crowd. His friends from college had moved on to successful careers and growing families, while Nathan remained stuck in the same warehouse job he had taken as a temporary solution 7 years ago. His dreams of becoming an engineer had faded with each passing year, replaced by the grinding reality of bills, rent, and the soul-crushing monotony of manual labor. But Nathan had one quality that set him apart, though he would never have recognized it himself. He had an enormous capacity for compassion, a deep-seated belief that every living being deserved kindness and a chance at happiness. It was this quality, dormant and unrecognized, that would change not only his life, but the lives of countless others across the galaxy. The rain hammered against the windows of Nathan's small apartment on a Tuesday evening that would change everything. He'd just returned from his second shift at the warehouse, his body aching from lifting boxes all day and his mind already dreading the lonely dinner of microwave leftovers that awaited him. Sarah had taken everything when she left except the couch, the television, and his battered collection of science fiction novels. She'd promised to stay in touch, to work things out, but her texts had grown fewer and farther between until they stopped altogether. Nathan had tried calling her a dozen times in the first month, but she never picked up, and eventually, he stopped trying. The apartment felt emptier than usual that night. The walls, once decorated with photographs of happier times, were now bare and stained where picture frames had hung. The kitchen counter was cluttered with unwashed dishes from the past week, and the smell of old coffee and stale air permeated everything. Nathan had stopped caring about the mess. What was the point of maintaining a home when there was no one to share it with? He dropped his keys on the counter with a metallic clatter and kicked off his boots, leaving them in a heap by the door. His feet ached, his back ached, and worst of all, his heart ached with a dull, persistent pain that no amount of distraction could ease. Nathan was reaching for the light switch when he heard it. A soft, mewling sound, like kittens crying in the hallway. He froze, his hands suspended in midair, listening. The sound came again, more insistent this time, accompanied by what sounded like a faint humming that seemed to resonate in his bones. His heart began to race as he approached the door, moving cautiously, unsure of what he would find. He peered through the peephole, squinting in the dim light of the hallway. The corridor was empty except for a large basket sitting directly in front of his apartment, illuminated by the flickering fluorescent light overhead. He opened the door cautiously, and the humming grew louder, filling the air with an otherworldly sound that was both beautiful and unsettling. The basket was woven from some material he'd never seen before, something that seemed to shimmer between silver and blue depending on the angle of the light. It looked organic, almost alive, with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and move as he watched. Inside, swaddled in blankets that appeared to be made of the same strange material, were 2 tiny figures. The infants couldn't have been more than a few months old. Their skin was a pale lavender color that reminded Nathan of twilight skies, smooth and luminescent in the dim hallway light. Their eyes were enormous and dark like polished obsidian, reflecting the light in a way that made them seem impossibly deep and ancient. Small, delicate antennae sprouted from their foreheads, no thicker than strands of hair, twitching and drooping as they cried. Their tiny mouths opened in distress, revealing what looked like normal baby tongues and gums. But their cries had that strange harmonic quality that made Nathan's chest vibrate. Then Nathan said, "What do we have here?" His voice came out as barely a whisper, hoarse with shock and disbelief. He knelt down beside the basket, his knees cracking in protest, and reached out with trembling fingers to touch the edge. The material was warm and soft, almost like living tissue, and it pulsed faintly under his touch. The babies stopped crying for a moment, their enormous eyes focusing on him with an intensity that made him catch his breath. They were looking at him not with the unfocused gaze of newborns, but with a clarity and awareness that seemed far beyond their apparent age. A note was pinned to the edge of the basket, folded and crumpled as if it had been written in haste. Nathan recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Sarah's, the same looping script she'd used to write love notes during their courtship and shopping lists during their marriage. His hands shook as he unpinned it and unfolded the paper. The message was short and devastating. "Nathan, I can't do this anymore. These are Mira and Luna. Their real parents were killed in some kind of accident off-world. The agency placed them with us because of my xenobiology background, but I never signed up to be a mother to aliens. I'm leaving Earth. Don't try to find me. They're your problem now. Do whatever you want with them. Sarah." Nathan read the note 3 times, his mind struggling to process the words. Xenobiology background. Sarah had been a lab technician at a private research facility, something to do with studying alien biology, but she'd never mentioned anything about adoption, about agencies, about taking in children from other worlds. The agency placed them with us. That meant she'd agreed to this, signed papers, made commitments, all without ever telling him. And now she was just abandoning them like they were unwanted furniture. He looked down at the 2 tiny beings in the basket, still watching him with those impossibly deep eyes. Rain blew in through the open doorway, cold droplets spattering on the worn hallway carpet. The babies began to cry again, their small fists waving in the air, their antennae drooping further. They looked so helpless, so vulnerable, so utterly dependent on someone, anyone, to care for them. Nathan's first instinct was to call someone. Child Protective Services. The police. Surely there were protocols for this kind of thing, agencies that dealt with abandoned children, even if those children happened to be from another planet. But as he pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the emergency call button, he hesitated. What would happen to them if he called? Would they be taken to some government facility, studied like specimens, kept in isolation? Would they be deported, sent back to a world where they had no family, no one to care for them? Would they end up in some kind of institutional care, passed from foster home to foster home, never knowing stability or love? The smaller of the 2 babies, the one Nathan assumed was Luna based on the tiny bracelet around her ankle with the name etched in a script he couldn't read, began to cry harder. Her antennae drooped until they were almost flat against her head, and her skin seemed to pale, losing some of its vibrant lavender hue. Something inside Nathan shifted at that moment, some protective instinct he didn't know he possessed. These babies had already lost their birth parents. They'd been placed with someone who was supposed to care for them, and that person had abandoned them. They deserved better. They deserved a chance. "Nathan Brooks, you're an idiot," he muttered to himself as he lifted the basket. It was surprisingly light, as if the strange material it was made from weighed almost nothing. He carried it inside, using his foot to kick the door shut behind him, cutting off the cold wind and rain. The apartment suddenly felt different, charged with a new energy, a new purpose. He set the basket down on the couch and stood there for a moment, hands on his hips, staring at the 2 tiny aliens who were now, apparently, his responsibility. The reality of the situation began to sink in. He had no idea how to care for human babies, let alone alien ones. He didn't know what they ate, how often they needed to be changed, what kind of environment they required. He didn't know if human baby supplies would work for them or if they needed specialized equipment. He didn't know if touching them was safe, if there were diseases they could transmit or allergies he should be aware of. He knew absolutely nothing, and yet here they were, depending on him for their very survival. Nathan ran his hands through his hair, pacing back and forth in front of the couch. Think. There had to be information somewhere. Sarah wouldn't have just taken them without some kind of instructions or guidelines. He looked more carefully at the basket, examining every inch of it, and found a small data chip attached to the handle with what looked like an organic adhesive. It was about the size of his thumbnail, translucent and faintly glowing. He rummaged through his closet, pulling out boxes of old electronics he'd accumulated over the years, and finally found a universal data reader he'd bought at a garage sale years ago. His hands fumbled as he plugged it into his laptop and inserted the chip. The screen flickered for a moment, then filled with a holographic projection that rose from the keyboard, startling him so much he nearly knocked over his coffee mug. A figure appeared in the air above his laptop, a stern-faced woman with crystalline skin that refracted light into tiny rainbows. She had multiple eyes, arranged in 2 rows across her forehead, and they all seemed to be looking in different directions at once. When she spoke, her voice was calm and measured, with an accent Nathan couldn't place. The words came out in a language he didn't recognize, a series of musical tones and clicks, but the universal reader immediately began translating, text scrolling across his laptop screen in perfect English. Greetings, prospective guardian. You have been entrusted with the care of 2 Valorian infants. This species requires specialized nutrition, environmental conditions, and social interaction to thrive. The following protocols must be observed to ensure their healthy development. The woman's image was replaced by a scrolling list of instructions, diagrams, and nutritional charts. Nathan grabbed a notebook and pen, scribbling frantically as the information poured past. Valorians, he learned, were a highly advanced species from a planet called Valora in the Andromeda Galaxy. They were known for their exceptional intelligence, their empathic abilities, and their strong family bonds. The 2 infants in his care were approximately 4 months old in human developmental terms, though Valorian gestation and maturation followed a different timeline. The nutritional requirements were complex. Valorian infants needed a specific formula made from a combination of plant-based proteins, amino acids, and a mineral compound called zeolite. The hologram provided detailed instructions for synthesizing the formula from Earth materials, but it required equipment Nathan didn't have and ingredients he'd never heard of. He made a note to research where he could find them, hoping desperately that they were available somewhere in Seattle. Environmental needs were equally specific. Valorians required a humidity level of at least 60% to keep their skin properly hydrated. They were highly sensitive to loud noises and bright lights, both of which could cause them severe distress and potentially damage their developing sensory organs. The apartment would need to be modified, made quieter and darker, with careful control of temperature and air quality. But it was the final requirement that made Nathan's stomach drop. Valorian infants required near-constant physical contact during their first year of life. Their species had evolved as highly social beings, and infant Valorians who were deprived of regular touch and interaction would fail to develop properly. They could suffer from a condition called touch starvation, which could lead to permanent cognitive and emotional damage. The hologram emphasized this point repeatedly, showing case studies of Valorian children who had been raised in isolation and the devastating effects it had on their development. Nathan looked at the 2 sleeping infants in the basket. Near constant physical contact. He worked 2 jobs, sometimes 16 hours a day. How was he supposed to provide constant care when he was barely home? He thought about his boss at the warehouse, a gruff man named Joe who had 0 patience for excuses. He thought about his landlord, who had already complained about noise from his upstairs neighbor. He thought about his bank account, which had barely enough to cover next month's rent. This was impossible. He couldn't do this. He should call someone, anyone, and hand over the responsibility to people who knew what they were doing. But as he watched Luna's small hand reach out in her sleep, grasping at nothing, searching for something to hold on to, he felt his resolve harden. These children had already been failed by the adults who were supposed to protect them. He wouldn't be another person who abandoned them. The night that followed was unlike any Nathan had ever experienced. He worked methodically through the hologram's instructions, pausing and replaying sections, taking detailed notes. The first priority was nutrition. The formula required several ingredients that were, thankfully, available at specialty health food stores and chemical supply shops, though they would be expensive. Nathan made a list, calculating costs in his head and wincing at the total. Around 2 in the morning, Mira woke up crying. Her antennae stood straight up, quivering, and her skin had taken on a slightly darker purple hue. Nathan consulted his notes frantically. Temperature regulation. Valorian infants change color based on their body temperature and emotional state. Darker purple meant she was cold. He adjusted the thermostat, cranking up the heat until the apartment felt like a sauna, and wrapped Mira in an extra blanket. Her color gradually returned to normal, and she settled back into sleep. An hour later, Luna woke up, but she wasn't crying. She was making a soft humming sound, different from the harmonic crying, more like a purr. Nathan picked her up carefully, supporting her head the way he'd seen in movies, and held her against his chest. She was so light, barely weighing anything, and so warm. Her skin was impossibly soft, and he could feel a faint vibration coming from her tiny body, that same purring hum. She looked up at him with those enormous dark eyes, and for a moment, Nathan felt like she was looking straight into his soul. "Hey there, little one," he said softly. "I know I'm not who you were expecting. I know I'm probably not doing any of this right, but I'm going to try my best. I promise you that." Luna's antennae perked up slightly, and she made a small cooing sound. Then she did something that made Nathan's heart skip a beat. She reached up with her tiny hand and touched his face, her fingers tracing the stubble on his chin, the laugh lines around his eyes. It was a gesture of such trust, such innocence, that Nathan felt tears prick at his eyes. He blinked them away, holding Luna close, and made a silent vow. Whatever it took, however hard it was, he would take care of these children. They were his responsibility now, and he would not fail them. The next morning, Nathan called in sick to both of his jobs, a luxury he couldn't afford but couldn't avoid. He knew he'd face consequences, probably lose pay if not worse, but the girls needed him. He couldn't leave them alone while he went to work. He couldn't ask a neighbor to watch them. He couldn't put them in daycare. They required specialized care that only he could provide, at least until he figured out a better solution. He spent the day shopping, using every dollar he had and maxing out his credit card. He bought a humidifier from a department store, blackout curtains from a home goods shop, and made trips to 3 different health food stores to gather the ingredients for the formula. The clerk at the chemical supply store looked at him suspiciously when he requested zeolite powder, asking what he needed it for. Nathan made up a story about a science project, paid in cash, and left before the clerk could ask more questions. Back at the apartment, he transformed his bedroom into a nursery. He moved his mattress into the living room, sleeping on the floor since the couch was too small. The bedroom got the humidifier, the blackout curtains, and a space heater to maintain the temperature. He mixed the first batch of formula according to the hologram's instructions, his hands shaking as he measured out the zeolite powder, the protein blend, and the other ingredients. The result was a pale blue liquid that smelled faintly of vanilla and something earthier, like mushrooms. When he offered the bottle to Mira, she latched onto it immediately, her dark eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made his breath catch. She drank greedily, her small throat working as she swallowed, and when she finished, she made a satisfied humming sound and closed her eyes. Nathan felt a surge of pride. He'd done it. He'd successfully fed an alien baby. Luna was more difficult. She refused the bottle, turning her head away and crying piteously. Nathan tried everything. He warmed the formula, thinking it might be too cold. He cooled it, thinking it might be too hot. He changed the bottle's nipple, trying different sizes and materials. Nothing worked. Luna just cried harder, her antennae drooping, her skin taking on that paler shade that indicated distress. Finally, in desperation, Nathan pulled off his shirt and held Luna against his bare chest, skin to skin. The crying stopped almost immediately. Luna's antennae perked up, and she nuzzled against him, making that soft purring sound. Then, and only then, did she accept the bottle. As she drank, Nathan could feel her warmth seeping into his skin, could feel that faint vibration that seemed to come from deep within her tiny body. It was strange but not unpleasant, and he found himself relaxing, the stress and exhaustion of the past 24 hours melting away. "You're a tricky one, aren't you?" Nathan murmured, stroking Luna's head gently. "All right, skin to skin it is. We'll figure this out together." The following weeks were a blur of exhaustion, stress, and small victories. Nathan quickly learned that Valorian babies operated on a different schedule than human infants. They slept in short bursts, no more than 2 hours at a time, and they were active during periods that seemed random and unpredictable. Mira was awake and alert in the early morning hours, demanding attention and stimulation. Luna was more active in the late afternoon and evening. Between the two of them, Nathan was lucky to get 4 hours of sleep a day and never more than 90 minutes at a stretch. His savings dwindled at an alarming rate. The special formula was expensive, and the girls needed feeding every 3 hours. The humidifier ran constantly, driving up his electricity bill. The heating costs were astronomical as he kept the apartment at a steady 80 degrees. Within 2 weeks, Nathan had burned through everything he'd saved and was relying on credit cards to buy groceries. He tried to return to work, but it was impossible. The warehouse job required his full attention and both hands, neither of which he could spare while caring for 2 infants. His boss, Joe, was more understanding than Nathan had expected. Joe had raised 6 kids of his own, and while none of them had been aliens, he understood the chaos of infant care. "Look, Nathan," Joe said, leaning back in his office chair, his weathered face sympathetic. "I get it. Kids are tough, but I can't keep your position open indefinitely. I've got a business to run." Nathan nodded, his heart sinking. He'd known this was coming, but it still hurt. "I understand. Thank you for the opportunity. Hold on, I'm not done." Joe pulled out a piece of paper and scribbled something on it. "I can't have you working the floor with babies in tow, but I can give you something else. We need someone to do inventory management, paperwork, that kind of thing. It's part-time, and the pay isn't great, but you can do it from home. I'll set you up with a laptop and remote access. Sound good?" Nathan felt relief wash over him. Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Joe." Joe waved him off. "Don't mention it. Just get me those inventory reports on time. And hey, bring the kids by sometime. My wife loves babies, even the purple ones from space." The remote work helped, but it wasn't enough. Nathan still needed his second job to make ends meet, and the janitorial work couldn't be done from home. He tried bringing the girls with him, setting up a makeshift nursery in the break room of the office building he cleaned. For a few nights, it worked. The girls seemed to tolerate the change in environment, and Nathan could work while keeping an eye on them. But then Luna had a meltdown. She started crying around midnight, and nothing Nathan did could calm her. Her cries triggered that echolocation pulse, and suddenly, every car alarm in the parking lot was going off, and the office's security system started malfunctioning. Lights flickered, computers rebooted randomly, and the building's automated phone system began calling random numbers. Nathan's supervisor, a stern woman named Margaret, was not amused. "Mr. Brooks, this is unacceptable. I understand you have personal challenges, but you cannot bring your children to work. It's a liability and a distraction." "I understand," Nathan said, defeated. "I'll make other arrangements." But there were no other arrangements. He couldn't afford a babysitter, especially not one trained to care for alien children. He couldn't ask his neighbors for help. Most of them already viewed him with suspicion, the single guy living alone who suddenly had 2 weird purple babies. Some had complained to the landlord about the strange noises coming from his apartment at night. Nathan had received a warning letter, threatening eviction if the disturbances continued. He was trapped. No money, no help, no options. Nathan sat on the floor of his apartment one night, Mira asleep in his lap and Luna dozing in the crook of his arm, and cried silently. He'd tried so hard, given everything he had, but it wasn't enough. He was failing them. The girls deserved better than this, better than a broke, exhausted man who had no idea what he was doing. It was around this time that Nathan met Dr. Evelyn Cross. He'd been searching online for any information about Valorian care, any resources that might help, and he'd found her name buried in an obscure forum for adoptive parents of non-human children. She was a xenobiologist at the University of Washington, one of the few people on Earth who specialized in interspecies medical care. Nathan had sent her an email, not expecting a response, but she'd replied within hours, agreeing to meet him. Dr. Cross was a tall woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She arrived at Nathan's apartment on a Saturday morning, carrying a large bag filled with medical equipment. She examined Mira and Luna with practiced efficiency, checking their reflexes, their skin elasticity, their eye responses. She listened to their hearts with a stethoscope, took their temperature with a device that looked like a thermometer but displayed readings in colors rather than numbers, and asked Nathan 100 questions about their feeding schedule, sleep patterns, and behavior. Finally, she sat back, a look of genuine surprise on her face. They're thriving. Valorian infants are notoriously difficult to care for, especially outside their native environment. The fact that they've survived this long, let alone flourished, is remarkable. You're doing an excellent job, Mr. Brooks. Nathan felt a surge of pride, quickly followed by exhaustion. I'm just doing my best. I don't feel like I'm doing enough. Dr. Cross smiled warmly. That's because you care. Most people would have given up by now, or handed them over to some government agency. The fact that you're still here, still fighting for them, says everything about your character. She spent the next 2 hours teaching Nathan things the hologram hadn't covered. She showed him how to check for signs of illness, how to soothe them when they were upset, how to stimulate their cognitive development through play and interaction. She brought samples of a more refined formula that was easier to digest and less expensive to make. She even brought 2 soft blankets woven from a material that mimicked the texture of Valorian parent skin, which would help the girls feel secure when Nathan couldn't hold them. Before she left, Dr. Cross sat down with Nathan and had a serious conversation. You need to understand what you're dealing with. Valorians are an incredibly advanced species, far beyond humans in many ways. As they grow, they'll develop abilities that humans don't have. Enhanced cognitive function, limited telepathy, and in some cases, a form of emotional projection. They'll be able to sense your feelings and, to some extent, influence them. Nathan frowned. Is that dangerous? Not inherently, but it means you need to be honest with them, especially as they get older. They'll know if you're lying or hiding something, and their bond with you will be stronger than any biological connection. Valorians imprint on their primary caregivers in a way that's almost irreversible. You're not just their guardian, Nathan. You're their parent in every way that matters. They will consider you their father for the rest of their lives. Nathan looked down at the 2 sleeping babies, their faces peaceful, their tiny chests rising and falling in sync. A lump formed in his throat. I can live with that. Dr. Cross stood to leave, then paused at the door. One more thing. There are people who won't understand this, who will see Mira and Luna as something other than children. You'll face prejudice, ignorance, maybe even hostility. You need to be prepared for that, and you need to protect them from it. I will. Nathan's voice was firm. Whatever it takes. The years that followed were a whirlwind of growth, challenges, and unexpected joys. Mira and Luna grew at a pace that both startled and delighted Nathan. By their first birthday, they were already walking and speaking in simple sentences. Their lavender skin deepened to a rich violet, their antennae lengthened and became more expressive, and their personalities began to emerge in vivid detail. Mira was the explorer, always curious, always pushing boundaries. She wanted to touch everything, taste everything, understand everything. She loved music, especially the old jazz records Nathan played on his ancient turntable, and would bob her head in time with the rhythm, her antennae swaying like conducting batons. She was fearless, climbing onto furniture, opening cabinets, investigating every corner of the apartment with tireless energy. Luna was different. She was quieter, more reserved, more contemplative. She loved books, even before she could read them, and would spend hours looking at the pictures in Nathan's science fiction novels, tracing the illustrations with her tiny fingers. She was fiercely attached to Nathan, crying if he left the room for more than a few minutes, and she had a habit of reaching for his face with her tiny hands, tracing the lines of his features as if memorizing them. Nathan found himself talking to them constantly, narrating his every action as he cooked, cleaned, or folded laundry. It's just you and me, girls. We're going to figure this out together. He read to them from his science fiction novels, even though they couldn't fully understand the words yet, and he sang them lullabies his mother had sung to him when he was a child. Some nights, when the stress got to be too much, when the bills piled too high and the future seemed too uncertain, he would hold them both close and remind himself why he was doing this. They needed him, and somehow, in ways he was only beginning to understand, he needed them too. By the time the girls were 2, they were speaking fluent English, though their voices carried a melodic quality that made even mundane conversations sound like music. They also retained fragments of their native Valorian language, a series of chimes and harmonics that Nathan could barely replicate. He learned that Valorian was a tonal language, where the same word could have different meanings depending on pitch and rhythm. Mira and Luna would sometimes speak to each other in Valorian, their voices intertwining in harmonies that made Nathan's chest ache with their beauty. It was around this time that their abilities began to manifest. Nathan first noticed when Mira started commenting on his emotions with uncanny accuracy. "You're sad today, Daddy," she said one morning, her dark eyes wide with concern. "Is it because the money is almost gone?" Nathan knelt down to her level, trying to hide his surprise. He'd been worrying about finances, but he hadn't said anything out loud. "How did you know that, sweetheart?" Mira touched her chest, right over her heart. "I can feel it. Here, like a gray cloud inside you." Dr. Cross had warned him about this. Valorian empathy was powerful and instinctive. As Mira grew, she would become increasingly sensitive to the emotions of people around her, able to read feelings as easily as humans read facial expressions. Nathan realized he would need to be more careful about managing his stress, at least when the girls were around. The last thing he wanted was to burden them with his adult worries. Luna's ability manifested differently. One evening, Nathan was particularly stressed about a series of bills that had all come due at once. He was pacing the apartment, muttering to himself, his mind spinning with calculations and worst-case scenarios. Luna toddled over, placed her small hand on his knee, and suddenly, the anxiety melted away. It was like someone had flipped a switch in his brain. The worries didn't disappear, but they felt manageable, distant, less overwhelming. A deep sense of peace settled over him, warm and comforting. Nathan looked down at Luna, who was watching him with those enormous dark eyes. "Did you just do that?" Luna smiled, a tiny, knowing smile. "You were loud inside, Daddy. Too loud. I made it quiet." Nathan pulled her into a hug, marveling at the gift she'd just given him. "Thank you, Luna. That helps a lot." As the girls grew older, Nathan knew he would need to address their education. He couldn't keep them isolated in the apartment forever. They needed social interaction, exposure to other children, the chance to learn and grow in a structured environment. But the thought of enrolling them in school filled him with dread. Would they be accepted? Would the other children be cruel? Would the teachers know how to handle them? He spent months researching schools, looking for one that would be welcoming and inclusive. He finally found a progressive elementary school in a neighboring district that prided itself on diversity and had experience with children from various backgrounds. The principal, a kind woman named Mrs. Henderson, interviewed Nathan and the girls personally. She looked at Mira and Luna with open curiosity, but no judgment. "We've had children from many different countries and cultures, but I'll admit, we've never had students from another planet. However, we believe that every child deserves an education and a chance to thrive. If you're willing to work with us, we're willing to work with you." Nathan felt tears of relief prick at his eyes. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means to us." The first day of kindergarten was terrifying. Nathan walked Mira and Luna to their classroom, his heart pounding with worry. He'd coached them on how to introduce themselves, how to answer questions about where they came from, how to handle comments about their appearance. But he knew that no amount of preparation could shield them from the reality of being different. Mira walked into the classroom with her head held high, confidence radiating from her tiny frame. She spotted a group of children building with blocks and marched over to them. "Hi, I'm Mira. Can I play with you?" Her antennae perked up cheerfully, and the other children stared at her in fascination. Luna was more hesitant. She clung to Nathan's hand, her eyes scanning the room nervously. Then she spotted a girl sitting alone in a corner, reading a picture book. Luna walked over slowly and sat down next to her, not saying anything, just being present. The girl looked up, smiled, and offered Luna the book. They sat together in companionable silence, and Nathan felt a flicker of hope. He forced himself to leave, trusting that the girls would be okay. The day dragged by in agonizing slowness. He checked his phone obsessively, waiting for a call from the school, bracing himself for reports of problems or complaints. But no call came. When he picked the girls up that afternoon, they were both smiling, their faces flushed with excitement. Daddy, I made 3 new friends, Mira said, bouncing on her toes. We built a castle out of blocks, and I helped them make it really tall. Luna was quieter, as always, but there was a light in her eyes that Nathan hadn't seen before. I read 5 books, Daddy. And Sarah, that's my new friend. She said my antennae are pretty. Nathan felt his heart swell with pride. He knelt down and hugged them both tight. I'm so proud of you both. You did great today. As the weeks went by, the girls thrived in school. Their teacher, Miss Harper, called Nathan in for a conference and spoke with genuine enthusiasm. Mr. Brooks, I have to tell you, Mira and Luna are extraordinary. They're not just keeping up with the other students, they're excelling. Myra's reading at a 3rd grade level already, and Luna's mathematical reasoning is off the charts. She solved a problem yesterday that I wouldn't expect most 2nd graders to understand. Nathan felt a swell of pride. They've always been smart. Miss Harper hesitated, choosing her words carefully. There's something else. The other children adore them. I've been teaching for 20 years, and I've never seen a class come together the way this one has. It's like Mira and Luna bring out the best in everyone around them. Conflicts are resolved more quickly. Children who were shy are coming out of their shells. It's remarkable. Nathan thought about Myra's empathy, her ability to sense and understand others' emotions. He thought about Luna's calming presence, the way she could soothe distressed people just by being near them. Their abilities weren't just helping them, they were helping everyone around them. That's just who they are. They make things better. But not everyone was so accepting. As the girls grew older, they encountered prejudice and ignorance. In 2nd grade, a boy named Tyler started bullying Mira. He called her a freak, pulled on her antennae during recess, and told the other kids not to play with her because she was weird. Mira came home crying one day, her antennae drooping, her usually vibrant skin pale with distress. Nathan felt rage surge through him, hot and consuming. He wanted to march to that boy's house, to demand that his parents discipline him, to make him understand the pain he'd caused. But Mira stopped him. It's okay, Daddy, she said, wiping her tears. He doesn't understand. He's scared of things that are different. I told him it hurt, and he said sorry. He didn't mean it at first, but I think he's starting to understand. Nathan knelt down, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You're so much braver than I am, Mira. I'm proud of you for handling it with kindness. She smiled, her antennae perking up slightly. I learned it from you, Daddy. You always say that kindness is stronger than anger. Luna dealt with prejudice in her own way. When a group of girls in her class excluded her from a birthday party because she was different, she didn't get angry or sad. Instead, she organized her own gathering, inviting everyone who had ever felt left out. The event, held in Nathan's small apartment, was a chaotic, joyful mess of laughter, games, and far too much cake. Luna had insisted on making traditional Valorian sweets, following recipes from the data chip, and the kids went wild for the sweet, crystalline candies that sparkled like gems. By the end of the party, even the girls who had excluded her were begging to be her friend. Nathan watched from the kitchen, marveling at Luna's quiet strength, her ability to turn hurt into healing. She was only 8 years old, but she already understood something it had taken Nathan decades to learn. The best response to cruelty was not revenge, but grace. As the girls approached their 10th birthday, Nathan began to notice subtle changes in their behavior. They were more independent, more confident, but there was also a growing restlessness. Mira spent hours reading about Valorian history and culture, materials Dr. Cross had helped Nathan obtain from various academic sources. She would ask questions about their home planet, about the customs and traditions of their people, about the parents they'd never known. One evening, as Nathan was tucking them into bed, Mira looked up at him with those dark, fathomless eyes. Daddy, do you ever wish we were human? That we were your real children? The question hit Nathan like a punch to the gut. He sat down on the edge of her bed, choosing his words carefully. No, sweetheart. I don't. You and Luna are perfect exactly the way you are. And you are my real children. Biology doesn't make a family. Love does. But things would be easier if we were human, Mira persisted, her voice small. You wouldn't have to fight so hard for us. You wouldn't have to deal with people staring or saying mean things. You could have a normal life. Nathan reached out, taking her hand. Fighting for you is the easiest thing I've ever done. And I don't want a normal life if it means not having you in it. You and Luna are the best things that ever happened to me. I mean that with every fiber of my being. Luna, lying in the bed across the room, spoke up. We're lucky to have you, Daddy. Some kids don't have anyone who loves them like you love us. Nathan's throat tightened. I'm the lucky one, girls. You taught me what it means to be a father. You gave my life meaning when I thought I'd lost everything. I love you both more than I could ever put into words. The following year brought new challenges that tested Nathan in ways he never anticipated. His health began to decline, the years of stress, poor sleep, and financial strain catching up with him. He developed a heart condition, nothing immediately life-threatening, but serious enough that his doctor insisted he reduce his work hours and stress levels. The problem was that reducing work meant reducing income, and they were already barely scraping by. Nathan tried to hide his health issues from the girls, but they knew. Mira could sense his pain, the physical and emotional toll his body was taking. Luna could feel the fear that gnawed at him in the quiet moments, the terror that he might not be around to see them grow up, to guide them through life, to protect them from a world that didn't always understand them. One morning, Nathan woke up to find Mira sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by books and papers. She'd been researching Valorian technology and had discovered something fascinating. Valorians had developed a method of synthesizing energy from organic waste, a process that could be scaled down and adapted for household use. The technology was clean, efficient, and relatively simple to build with Earth materials. Daddy, look, Mira said, her face glowing with excitement as Nathan shuffled into the kitchen. I've been working on this for weeks. I think I can build a device that converts food scraps into electricity. If it works, we could cut our energy bills to almost nothing. Nathan looked at the diagrams and calculations spread across the table. He could barely understand them. Mira was 11 years old, but her mind was operating at a level far beyond her years. Sweetheart, this is incredible. But building something like this would require equipment, materials, and expertise we don't have. Myra's antennae drooped slightly, but her determination didn't waver. Dr. Cross said she could help. She has access to the university labs, and I've been saving my allowance. I have $43. Nathan felt his heart swell with love and pride. He knelt down next to her chair, taking her small hands in his. You want to do this to help me, don't you? Mira nodded, tears glistening in her dark eyes. You work so hard for us, Daddy. You're always tired, and I can feel how much you hurt, even when you try to hide it. I want to help. I want to make things easier for you. Nathan pulled her into a hug, holding her tight. You're an amazing daughter, Mira. All right, let's do this. Let's build your device and see if we can change the world. With Dr. Cross's help, Mira built her prototype in the university lab. It took 3 months of trial and error, countless failed attempts, and more than a few minor explosions that left Myra's eyebrows singed. But eventually, she succeeded. The device she created was no bigger than a shoebox, sleek and elegant, with a port for inserting organic material and an output that could be plugged directly into a standard electrical outlet. The first test was conducted in Nathan's apartment. Mira loaded the device with vegetable peelings, coffee grounds, and other kitchen waste, then activated it. There was a soft humming sound, a faint glow from the device's core, and then the digital display on their electric meter began to spin backward. They were generating power, clean and free, from garbage. Dr. Cross was amazed. This is revolutionary. Do you have any idea what this could mean? This technology could solve energy crises around the world. Mira, you're a genius. Mira blushed, her skin taking on a deeper purple hue. I just wanted to help my dad. Within months, they had a patent pending and interest from several green energy companies. Nathan was overwhelmed by the business side of things, contracts and negotiations, and legal jargon he didn't understand. Dr. Cross connected him with a patent attorney who worked pro bono for promising new technologies, and together they navigated the complex process. The licensing deal they eventually signed with a major renewable energy corporation was more money than Nathan had ever imagined. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. Enough to pay off his medical bills. Enough to clear his debts. Enough to set up college funds for both girls. Enough to quit his warehouse job and focus on being a full-time father. Nathan cried when he signed the contract, tears of relief and gratitude streaming down his face. He hugged Mira tight, thanking her over and over. She just smiled and said you would have done the same for us, Daddy. But the real miracle came on the girl's 13th birthday. Nathan had planned a small party, just a few close friends and a homemade cake. Money was better now, but he still preferred simple celebrations. When he came home from a grocery run that afternoon, he found the apartment transformed. Streamers hung from the ceiling in swirls of silver and violet. Balloons floated in every corner, some filled with regular air and others with a lighter-than-air Valorian gas that made them glow softly. A table was laden with food, much of it traditional Valorian dishes that Mira and Luna had learned to make from the data chips archives. Surprise! The girls shouted in unison, their antennae quivering with excitement. Nathan stood in the doorway, overwhelmed. You did all this? Mira grinned, her whole face lighting up. We wanted to do something special for you. You've given us so much, Daddy. It's our turn to give back. Luna stepped forward, holding a small, wrapped package. This is from both of us. Nathan unwrapped it with trembling hands. Inside was a photo album, handmade and bound with Valorian silk thread. The cover was decorated with pressed flowers and a photograph of all three of them from the previous summer. He opened it carefully. The first page held a picture he'd forgotten existed. There he was, standing in the doorway of their old apartment, holding the basket with two tiny lavender babies inside. His face was a mixture of terror and wonder, his eyes wide, his hair disheveled. Someone must have taken it from across the hall, capturing the moment that had changed everything. As he turned the pages, the story of their life together unfolded. There they were on the girls' first birthday, Mira covered in cake and Luna laughing. There was their first day of school, Mira and Luna grinning at the camera while Nathan stood behind them, his hand on their shoulders, pride evident in his expression. There were snapshots of Halloweens, Thanksgivings, Christmases, pictures of science fairs, school plays, trips to the park. Everyday moments that Nathan had forgotten but the girls had preserved. On the last page was a letter, written in both girls' handwriting, alternating between Myra's bold, confident script and Luna's delicate, precise lettering. Dear Daddy, thank you for saving us. Thank you for loving us when no one else would. Thank you for showing us that family isn't about where you come from, but about who chooses to stand by you. Thank you for teaching us kindness, courage, and compassion. Thank you for being the best father in the universe. We love you more than words can say. Always and forever, Mira and Luna. Nathan couldn't hold back the tears anymore. He pulled them both into a hug, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. I love you both so much. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. As the girls entered their teenage years, they became increasingly active in advocacy work. They started a blog where they shared their experiences growing up as aliens on Earth, discussing the challenges and joys of being different. They spoke at schools and conferences about the importance of acceptance and understanding. They volunteered at community centers, helping refugee families adjust to life in a new country, drawing parallels between their own experiences and those of immigrants. Their efforts caught the attention of the Galactic Council, the governing body that oversaw interspecies relations across known space. A delegation arrived on Earth, led by a tall, imposing figure named Counselor Thane. He was from a species Nathan didn't recognize, with skin like polished bronze and eyes that glowed faintly amber in the dim light of the apartment. His presence filled the room, commanding respect without demanding it. Mr. Brooks, Counselor Thane said, his voice deep and resonant like distant thunder. We have been following your daughter's work with great interest. Their advocacy has inspired countless beings across the galaxy. But more than that, their story has brought attention to a grave injustice that has been hidden for too long. Nathan frowned, his protective instincts immediately on alert. What do you mean? The counselor's expression grew somber. When Mira and Luna's birth parents were killed, it was not an accident, as you were led to believe. They were murdered by a faction that opposes interspecies cooperation. The individuals responsible have been apprehended and are facing justice. But the agency that placed Mira and Luna with your former spouse was part of a larger trafficking network. Many children were taken from their families under false pretenses and placed in unsuitable homes, or worse. Nathan felt a chill run down his spine. And Sarah? Counselor Thane's eyes flickered. She has been located and is facing charges for child abandonment and complicity in the trafficking operation. However, That is not why I am here today. The counselor stepped forward, his gaze steady and unwavering. The Galactic Council wishes to honor you, Mr. Brooks. Your actions, though born of compassion rather than duty, have exemplified the best of what humanity has to offer. You took in 2 children who were not your own, who were not even your species, and you gave them a life filled with love and opportunity. You sacrificed your own comfort, your health, your financial security, all for the sake of 2 beings who had no claim on you except their need. You are a reminder that kinship transcends biology, that family is a choice we make every day, and that love is the most powerful force in any universe. Nathan shook his head, overwhelmed and uncomfortable with the praise. I didn't do anything special. I just did what anyone should do. And yet, so few do, the counselor replied. He produced a small, crystalline medallion from his robes, suspended on a chain of what looked like woven starlight. This is the Star of Unity, awarded to those who have made extraordinary contributions to interspecies harmony. It is one of the highest honors the Galactic Council can bestow. It has been awarded only 17 times in the past 1,000 years. Nathan took the medallion with shaking hands. It was surprisingly light, almost weightless, and it pulsed with a soft inner light that seemed to respond to his touch. He looked at Mira and Luna, who were watching from the doorway, their faces glowing with pride, their antennae standing straight up in joy. Thank you, Nathan said quietly. But the real honor is being their father. The years continued to pass, measured not in months, but in milestones. Mira and Luna grew into remarkable young women, each carving their own path in the world while remaining inseparable from each other and from Nathan. Mira pursued a career in diplomacy, using her empathic abilities to mediate conflicts between species, between nations, between people who had forgotten how to listen to each other. She became known across the galaxy as the peacemaker, traveling to distant worlds and resolving disputes that had lasted for generations. Luna became a scientist, building on the work she'd started as a child. She developed technologies that improved lives across multiple worlds, from water purification systems for drought-stricken planets to medical devices that could diagnose and treat diseases that had previously been incurable. She worked quietly, avoiding the spotlight, but her contributions were immeasurable. They traveled often, their work taking them to distant corners of the galaxy, but they always came home to Nathan. No matter how far they went, no matter how important their missions, they made time for regular visits, for long video calls, for messages that bridged the vast distances of space. On the eve of their 20th birthday, the 3 of them sat on the roof of Nathan's house. He'd finally been able to afford a small home on the outskirts of Seattle, with a garden where Luna grew hybrid Earth-Valorian flowers and a workshop where Mira tinkered with new diplomatic technologies. The city lights below were a blur of color, but above, the sky was clear and infinite, filled with stars that seemed close enough to touch. Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if we hadn't come into it? Mira asked, her voice soft and contemplative. Nathan considered the question carefully. He thought about the man he'd been before that rainy Tuesday evening, lonely and adrift, working meaningless jobs and reading about adventures he'd never have. Honestly, I think I'd have been lost. You 2 gave me purpose. You gave me a reason to keep going, to be better, to matter. Without you, I don't know who I would have become, but I know I wouldn't have been happy. Luna leaned her head on his shoulder, her antennae gently brushing against his cheek. We're the ones who were lost, Daddy. You saved us, not just from being abandoned, but from a life without love, without belonging, without a home. Nathan smiled, wrapping an arm around each of them. We saved each other. That's what family does. As they sat there, surrounded by the quiet hum of the city and the distant twinkle of stars, Nathan realized that this was what happiness felt like. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of love. Not the erasure of pain, but the creation of meaning. He'd started out as a lonely, broken man, and through the simple act of opening his door and his heart, he'd found a family that transcended species, transcended worlds, transcended everything he'd thought was possible. Mira and Luna had indeed become his everyday miracle, not because they were extraordinary, though they were, but because they had chosen him just as much as he had chosen them. And in a galaxy filled with wonders and terrors, that choice, that bond, was the most powerful force of all. Years later, when Nathan was an old man, his hair white and his body frail, Mira and Luna were still by his side. They had families of their own now, children who called Nathan Grandpa and climbed onto his lap to hear stories of the old days. The small house had been expanded to accommodate the growing family, with additions and modifications that blended Earth and Valorian architecture in ways that were both beautiful and functional. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Nathan sat on the porch with Mira and Luna flanking him. His health was failing, he knew. The heart condition that had plagued him for years was finally taking its toll. His time was growing short, but he felt no fear, only gratitude for a life well lived and well loved. "I need to tell you something," Nathan said, his voice weak but steady. "I know I'm not going to be around much longer. I can feel it. My body is tired, and it's ready to rest." Myra's antennae drooped, and tears filled her dark eyes. "Daddy, don't say that. You're going to be fine. We'll find a doctor, a treatment, something." Nathan smiled gently, squeezing her hand. "It's okay, sweetheart. I've had a good life, a wonderful life, because of you too. And I need you to know that being your father was the greatest gift I ever received. Every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt was worth it 1,000 times over. You made me a better person. You gave my life meaning." Luna couldn't speak through her tears. She just held his hand tighter, her calming presence washing over him, easing the pain and fear. Nathan closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of the setting sun on his face and the gentle pressure of his daughter's hands in his. He thought about the scared, lonely man he'd been all those years ago, standing in a dingy hallway, looking down at 2 abandoned alien babies. He thought about all the battles he'd fought, the victories he'd won, and the love he'd given and received. He thought about how one moment of compassion had changed everything, had created a family where none existed, had proven that love truly knows no boundaries. "Thank you," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to the girls or to the universe itself. "Thank you for everything." When Nathan Brooks passed away 3 days later, surrounded by the people he loved, it was not a tragedy. It was the natural conclusion to a life well lived. A story that had begun with an act of kindness and ended with a legacy of love that would ripple across the stars for generations to come. He died peacefully in his sleep, a smile on his face, Mira holding one hand and Luna holding the other. At Nathan's funeral, beings from across the galaxy gathered to pay their respects. Humans, Valorians, and dozens of other species stood together, united in their grief and their admiration for a man who had embodied the very best of what it meant to be human. The ceremony was held in a large hall at the University of Washington, the same place where Dr. Cross had first helped Nathan learn to care for the girls. Now, decades later, she stood at the podium, her silver hair now pure white, her eyes still sharp despite her age. Nathan Brooks was not a famous man, Dr. Cross said, her voice carrying across the silent hall. He was not rich. He was not powerful. He was not a scientist or a leader or a hero in any traditional sense. But he changed the world. He changed it by opening his heart to 2 children who needed him. He changed it by choosing love over fear, compassion over convenience, sacrifice over selfishness. He showed us all what it means to be truly human. Mira and Luna stood at the front, their faces composed but their antennae trembling with emotion. When it was their turn to speak, they delivered the eulogy together, their voices intertwining in a Valorian harmonic tradition that represented the unity of family. "Our father taught us that family is not defined by blood or biology," Mira said, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "It is defined by choice, by commitment, by love. He chose us when no one else would, and in doing so, he changed not just our lives, but the lives of countless others. He showed us that one person, armed with nothing but compassion and determination, can make a difference that echoes across the stars." Luna stepped forward, her voice soft but unwavering. "He was not a perfect man. He made mistakes, he struggled, he doubted himself. But he never gave up on us, and he never stopped believing in the power of love. He taught us that strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up every time you do." He taught us that kindness is not weakness. It's the greatest form of courage. He taught us that family is not something you're born into. It's something you build every day with every choice you make. As they spoke, holographic images played above the gathered crowd, showing Nathan throughout his life. There he was as a young man, full of hope and dreams. There he was holding Mira and Luna for the first time, his face a mixture of terror and determination. There he was laughing with them, teaching them to ride bikes, helping them with homework, standing by their side as they grew into the incredible women they had become. The display ended with a final image, Nathan on the porch of his house, Mira and Luna on either side of him, all three of them smiling at the camera. The sun was setting behind them, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and their faces glowed with love and contentment. Beneath the image were the words he had lived by, the philosophy that had guided his every action. Love is not a finite resource. The more you give, the more you have. After the service, as the mourners dispersed and the sun dipped below the horizon, Mira and Luna stood alone by Nathan's grave. They held hands, their antennae intertwined in a gesture of comfort and solidarity, and they wept. Not for themselves, but for the world that had lost a truly remarkable man. But even as they grieved, they felt his presence, not as a ghost or a memory, but as a living, breathing part of who they were. Nathan Brooks had given them life, not once, but twice. First, when he had taken them in and saved them from abandonment. And second, when he had shown them what it meant to live with purpose, to love without reservation, to stand firm in the face of adversity. His legacy lived on in them, in their work, in their families, and in the countless lives they touched. And as they looked up at the stars, the same stars Nathan had gazed at on that rooftop so many years ago, they knew that his spirit was out there, woven into the very fabric of the universe he had helped to bring together. Nathan Brooks, the single dad who had saved two alien girls left behind by a heartless woman, had become something far greater than he ever imagined. He had become a symbol, a beacon, a reminder that humanity's true power lay not in conquest or domination, but in its boundless capacity for kindness. He had proven that one ordinary person, faced with an extraordinary situation, could choose love over fear and change the course of history. And in a galaxy that often seemed cold and indifferent, that was the most extraordinary miracle of all. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.